Kentucky was able to complete their wild comeback this weekend, but Kansas, not so much.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. We're your host. This fine gentleman to my side is Mr. Andy Patton. I'm Isaac Schade, and you're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Special shout out to all you everydayers joining us, all the members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord. We want to thank all of you for making us your first listen or watch, and remind you that you can catch every episode ad-free on Amazon Music. This episode is brought to you by our good friends at FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers, you place a $5 bet, and if it wins, you get $150 back in bonus bets. Check it all out at FanDuel.com. Andy, we had another insane weekend. So much going on. The wrap up of the Big 12, Big East. SEC gets some huge wins with Mizzou knocking off Kansas, Kentucky knocking off Gonzaga, storming back from 18 down in the battle for Seattle. Got those. The first ACC games. Big Ten is almost wrapping up their first two games. Man, so much. Andy, ahead of, unfortunately, a slower week this week. Most schools are on exam breaks, so we can all catch our breath after the sprint at the beginning of the season. So, Andy, look, Kentucky gets this massive win for the SEC at the expense of Gonzaga, and Kansas, ooh, baby, they have lost 2 straight games to unranked teams, meaning that the Missouri, as we say here in the state I live in, the Missouri Tigers also get a massive SEC win, Andy, for Mizzou. The first win against Kansas since leaving the Big 12, in their first win against AP number 1 since beating Kansas on February 4th of 1997, when I was in approximately 6th grade, I think. Mizzou 76-67. Andy, what happened to the Jayhawks on Sunday afternoon?
Yeah, it was what a win for Mizzou, for Kansas, a team that we knew that they might have some growing pains with so many new faces, but we thought, okay, they're returning they're getting their point guard back. They're getting their center back. Their whole front court's coming back. And Adams and Dickinson, you have DeJuan Harris coming back. I kind of think the expectation was that, well, it might take them a little bit of time to get some of the wings acclimated. But yet in this game, I mean, we're how far into the season? And yet AJ Store's not playing well. Rylan Griffin's not playing well. Like the lack of any kind of production from the transfer. David Coit had a good game. Dickie Coit, I think he had 14 for Kansas. But outside of that, I mean, we saw basically nothing from Store, very little from Rylan Griffin. Zeke Mayo started and scored 4 points. Like, you can't have your very expensive, very talented transfer portal wing class basically all not contribute in this game. I mean, it was just they didn't know where to turn to. Dickinson had a fine game, but everybody else really didn't step up in a way that they needed him to. Kansas had 15 turnovers in the first half, Isaac, in the first half. That is insane. Yeah. Mizzou led by as many as 18 in the first half. Look, big shout out to Bill Self and Kansas for storming back, 15-0 run. They cut it all the way down to 9. I think at one point they cut it all the way down to 2 with a little over 2 minutes to go. Right. But then again, if we're going to give a shout out to Kansas for making that kind of run, also the resolve and fortitude of Dennis Gates's club to still pull off a W. It actually kind of reminded me a little bit of what happened to Kansas earlier this year when North Carolina made that huge comeback, down 20, came all the way back. I think even took a lead, or at least was within a possession.
They did.
Before Kansas still won that game. So they kind of got it handed to them in the same way that what they did to North Carolina here. But Kansas is a team that I've been skeptical about. I've had them ranked first or second most of the weeks we've done our rankings. So I haven't been a hater necessarily, but I have been skeptical. And seeing these 2 games here, it'll be interesting to see how Bill Self gets this team back on track, because I think they're having some issues trying to figure out what lineups are going to work best for them. And certainly there aren't going to be too many games where basically every one of their wings plays poorly. But this was a real challenge for them, and Mizzou exploited a lot of the things that they've been struggling with, even in their wins earlier in the year.
Yeah, I mean, Mizzou got that 24-point lead, Andy, and I was ready to switch to other games, and then Kansas just started going on this run. But what was interesting watching this game, when it was down 7 at one point. They get Mizzou gets a steal from Anthony Robinson, and they just start pushing it back out. And look, you made this point about getting paid a lot of money. Literally on the broadcast, Andy, Fran Fraschilla said, and I quote, because I rewound it to make sure I got this correct. Speaking of AJ Storr missing a shot, he's paid a lot of money to make that shot. He's got to make that shot. And Andy, that was not a slip, a misstep. It's not something Fran's going to have to apologize for or mea culpa or get on. Like, that is the wild reality of college athletics now, that we just say these things. But not only, I think it speaks to this bigger thing of not only can we say those, but these players are going to be held culpable. If we're going to pay you a crap ton of money to come in, you got to produce or like. And I heard, I wish I could remember what game it was recently, but Jay Williams, the former Duke great national player of the year, was talking about bad investments that teams are making in the transfer portal. And that's just, I've been ruminating on that all weekend, because it's like, there are teams that made some very good investments this offseason, and there's some teams that made some very bad investments on a week where we don't have many great games. That might be something we kind of look at and talk about some. But as I look at Kansas, Andy, in this game, they had a ton of opportunities to take a lead. They just missed a ton of shots they would normally make, and specifically in the second half as things were getting away. And it's just congrats to Mizzou, man. Massive win for this team. We've talked about Dennis Gates needing to get back around. So, this is about Kansas, yes, but let's celebrate Mizzou in the same breath.
Yeah, I don't think this is necessarily like a job-saving win for Dennis Gates, in part because I think he was probably going to get unless this year went similarly bad to last year, he was probably going to continue to get. He wasn't going to get fired after this year anyway, especially with landing a really strong transfer portal class and freshman class. But this is the kind of win that really solidifies that he's not going anywhere. Like he would genuinely have to go winless in the SEC again at this point. And if that does happen, it's probably a testament to how freaking strong the SEC is, because this conference, it has been absolutely fantastic. Texas A&M picked up a win over Texas Tech. Vanderbilt picked up a win over TCU. That's 2 SEC teams beating 2 pretty good Big 12 teams. Obviously, we have the Gonzaga Kentucky game, which we'll talk about here in a second. We had now Mizzou over Kansas. This conference is just playing some really incredible basketball right now. And Mizzou, looks like a team that's going to be in that mix along with, pretty much the rest of the conference at this point.
Yep. And Andy, let's go to that game. We just talked about Kansas losing 2 in a row. Kentucky was in danger of doing that. Remember, they went and lost at Clemson in the ACC SEC Challenge this week, and they go up to Seattle to Climate Pledge Arena. Kentucky is down, Andy, 16 at the break. They storm all the way back to win 90-89 in overtime in a game that they never led other than in overtime. My friend, you were in the building. Tell us what you saw.
Yeah, it was really a tale of two halves in an incredible way. Gonzaga just blasted out of this game, 50 points in the first half. They were shooting well. They were defending well. They were getting out in transition. Graham Ike went insane, and it was such a big key for this game of everybody who watched Kentucky Clemson knew, all right, Ian Shefflin, he didn't shoot it very well in that game, but he dominated down low. He was gobbling up rebounds. He was using his physicality, and we thought, all right, that's what Gonzaga needs to do, establish Graham Ike down low, let him go to work, and he did. And it worked. It was the game plan was executed perfectly, but Mark Pope is great at those halftime adjustments. We saw it against Duke. We even saw it against Clemson. They didn't win that game, but they erased the deficit that they had at halftime. And that's what happened in this game. The first 5 minutes of the second half, basically Gonzaga's 16-point lead, which they bumped all the way up to 18 at one point, was pretty much gone. And again, they never actually gave up the lead until I think the final 90 seconds was when Kentucky finally tied it, and then they didn't lead until they went into overtime. They scored the first 7 points of overtime, and at that point, everybody in the building thought for sure it was over. Gonzaga actually then hit 3 threes in overtime, which was the same amount they had hit in the entire first 2 halves combined of the game, and brought it within 1. Had an opportunity, got a defensive rebound off a free throw. Dusty Stromer took a couple dribbles, tried to get a shot up, ended up, I think, looking at the clock before realizing he hadn't gathered the ball all the way, and that's how they didn't get a shot in the final possession. But This was a really strong performance from Kentucky. They won this game without Lamont Butler, who's on the shelf. They won this game without Kirk Kriisa for most of the second half. He went down with a non-contact injury. It wasn't super clear what happened, but the latest indication is that he's going to have surgery and he is out indefinitely. So Kentucky may have to continue this season without Kriisa for a while. We'll see what the status update is on Lamont Butler. Doesn't seem to be as significant for him, but for them to win this game without their 2 point guards for the last 15, 20 minutes or so of gameplay was pretty impressive on their end. And Gonzaga, they're going to be fine. They're going to be fine. But this was, they haven't won at Climate Pledge Arena since it's been named Climate Pledge Arena. They haven't won in Seattle in this venue, at least since 2015 when they beat Tennessee. Now their losses were to Alabama in 2021 and Yukon last year. So it's not like, you can stomach losses to those two teams and, of course, to Kentucky this year. But I'll tell you, as somebody who lives in that area, as somebody who knows the majority of, thousands of Seattle area Gonzaga fans who love going to that game, we'd really like to see a W there. So hopefully the Zags will find a way to get one soon.
Yeah, and Andy, I think you're spot on with that, because this is ultimately, if from what we've learned, at least so far in the first month-ish of this season, these are both two top 10 teams in Gonzaga and Kentucky. And it's a different storyline than Kansas. And I know Kansas was on the road, but they got to beat that Mizzou team. There is no excuse for not winning that game. This to me is like two teams that you could see in the Elite Eight or Final Four playing. And a 10-game series at a neutral is probably split. And so it's like, if you're Gonzaga, you hate that you didn't hold on to it. But ultimately, I haven't done my top 25 rankings. I think you said you bumped Gonzaga down one. I'm not going to move them that far because a bunch of teams lost. And this is just what happens when two marquee teams play each other. Let's not forget, I know Kentucky is literally a whole new roster. But for the Kentucky fan base, they're pissed because they lost that game to Gonzaga last year that started Gonzaga's run all the way to the Sweet 16 there. And so I think that's a storyline as well here, and something that we can't forget.
I'll mention one more thing here. Gonzaga had won 175 straight games when they were leading by 10 or more points at halftime. And this gets brought up on the broadcast every time. I don't know how many times they said it during the Indiana game. And I remember starting to feel uneasy. I was like, all right, Farnham, can we not say that so many times? And Gonzaga held on against Indiana, but I thought that the Roosters were going to come home eventually on that. Them continuing to 175 straight games is obscene of a stretch. So it had to end sometime. I guess if you're going to have your streak, and losing it in a neutral site to a team ranked inside the top 5 is probably not the worst way for it to happen. But it was hard to watch in real time, I'll tell you that.
And we said it on Friday's show, or you did, that Mark Pope certainly knows how to handle Gonzaga from BYU's years in the West Coast Conference. Andy, very quickly, two other big SEC wins that both happened at Dickies Arena in Fort Worth on Sunday, starting with Vanderbilt beating TCU 83-74. The Commodores 9-1. Andy, crazy stuff there. Good for them. Texas A&M outlast Texas Tech 72-67. Wade Taylor led the way for the Aggies with 19. Mea culpa. We both said on Friday's show Texas Tech was the better team and should win this game. They didn't, but I still feel strongly that ultimately I do still think they're the better team than Texas A&M. They just weren't on this.
Well, two big-time wins for the Big East Conference this weekend. Yukon has now won 2 big games in a row. They took down Texas after beating Baylor last week. Marquette gets a big win over Wisconsin. The Badgers now lost 2 in a row, although neither of them were particularly terrible losses. We're going to break those 2 games down coming up here in just a second. But first, nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. It's guaranteed perfection in every single bite, and right now you can save on unforgettable gifts with 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, score an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. With 5 generations of experience, they constantly deliver the world's best steak experience, and the gift-giving experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages featuring gourmet favorites. From legendary steaks to mouth-watering desserts and more, save 50% off site-wide for a limited time at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. Minimum purchase may apply. All right, Isaac, pair of big-time wins for the Big East Conference. There's been a lot of conversation and consternation about the Big East this year and the depth of the league, and especially with UConn going 0-3 in Maui. And yet we're going to talk about Marquette and UConn here in this segment, but it's also worth pointing out St. John's got a nice win over Kansas State. Creighton got a nice win over UNLV. We won't talk about what happened to Providence, but there's some other quality wins for the Big East in the last couple of days. We knew that both Marquette and Wisconsin, they were both coming off losses. Somebody was going to have to go 0-2. Wisconsin ends up being that team. Again, they lost to Michigan earlier in the week and Marquette. Neither of them are bad losses. They lost to Michigan at home. You never like that, but they lost to Marquette here on the road. It was 88-74, the final score. Cam Jones continued to do his crusade for All-American status, which at this point feels like a pretty much lock, assuming he doesn't get hurt. 32 points for him with 6 assists and 4 steals in this one. The Badgers actually shot just under 39% from 3, but they had 16 turnovers. Marquette, really nice job on the defensive end, balanced scoring attack. I know Jones did most of the damage, but they had multiple other guys in double figures. Really nice stuff from Marquette, a team that I was skeptical about a lot earlier in the year, especially that close win over Maryland, which has aged well, as Maryland looks very good so far this season. And for Marquette, I was concerned about the front court depth, but to be honest, Wisconsin's not a team that has a ton of size in the front court either, so it ended up being a good matchup for the Golden Eagles. They go out and get themselves a nice W here.
Yeah, I mean, Marquette has one loss, and it's a true road loss at Iowa State, who, in my opinion, is a top 5 team in the sport this year. I'm going to live with that, and that's going to age very well. I mean, you said it. Cam Jones is just absurd. Absolutely absurd with what he's doing. I mean, Shaka, it's funny because we're just about to talk about his former team losing at home to UConn, and it's just like, he just wins. Yeah, Andy, I don't know what else to say. Like him leaving and going to Marquette, it's like, I don't know. Is it a bit of a running away? I mean, he's gone to Marquette and just won and won. And won, and they were down. Wisconsin was up at the half. I mean, it was just by 2, and then Marquette rolls off 51 points in the second half of this game to get a very comfortable 14-point victory. That's what they do, man. They're just going to keep on doing it.
Yeah, and with Marquette, I think like the player development, there's so few programs that I think are developing talent consistently the way that Marquette is. One of them we're about to talk about is UConn. I think Gonzaga's in that conversation. I think there's a handful of others that are doing it at an extremely high level as well. Purdue should certainly get a mention there. But for Marquette, I mean, we're talking about Cam Jones as an All-American, and maybe someday we'll be talking about like Stevie Mitchell or Royce Parham or some of those other guys, because they just continue to develop guys, the next man up mentality. I mean, they didn't go out and get a single player in the transfer portal, which we were very skeptical about. And yet, same with Purdue. Here it is. The next guy up, Trey Kaufman-Renn, steps up, having a monster year. Now Cam Jones, we knew he'd step up, but we're seeing it with Mitchell. We're seeing it with Parham. We're seeing it with Joplin and Ben Gold. And it's just a tremendous ability for Shaka to trust his guys, to develop them behind the scenes and have them ready to play when they need them to step up into bigger roles. And there's so few coaches who can. There's a lot of coaches who can do it for a year or 2 or 3 even, but to do it at the consistency that Shaka has done it, at the level that they have done it, is really tremendous. This team being top 5 after losing Kolek and Oso and not replacing them with any new talent is a tremendous, tremendous accomplishment for Shaka and should not go unnoticed with what this team is doing so far this year.
And things don't get easier for either team, Andy. Wisconsin has to go on the road to Illinois on Tuesday. Could very, very well be a 3-game losing streak. Yeah. And then look, Marquette's next game is a sneaky good game. They go to Dayton this Saturday. That's going to be a fun one.
Yeah. UConn at Texas, the other game we wanted to talk about here, Danny Hurley's team. They picked up a win over Baylor after going 0-3 in Maui. Obviously, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of conversation about UConn. What does this mean? They're out of the top 25. In our top 25, they stayed barely in the top 25 of the AP poll after those losses, but then they go beat Baylor. They beat Baylor at home, I should say, and then they go on the road to the Moody Center to take on Texas, pick up a W there, 76-65. For the Huskies. Nice bounce back for them, and nice to have Alex Karaban back. I'm not sure they win this game without him. 21 points and 11 boards for him, 4 assists, 2 steals, 2 blocks. just a textbook performance from their All-American candidate, their star player, their two-time national champion. He wasn't super efficient, 6 of 14, but he knocked down 3 out of 5 threes. He was 6 of 7 from the line. And really, the whole team contributed. Solo Ball hit 4 threes. Hassan Diarra didn't score much, but he had 11 assists. Terrace Reed had a great game off the bench. Samson Johnson had a good game in the starting lineup. Both those guys played like under 18 minutes, but both were really effective. Liam McNeely only had 7, but he had 9 boards and 3 assists. Just a really all-around strong performance from UConn. They're still not getting much from their other transfer addition, Aiden Mahaney. He had a nice game against Baylor, but didn't even score in this game. Only played 6 minutes for Danny Hurley's team. When you're getting those kind of performances from Ball and Diarra, though, I guess you don't have room to play all your guards. So nice stuff from UConn here, bouncing back in a major way. We did not have them ranked in our top 25 last week. I'm feeling pretty confident that we are going to have them ranked this week. I moved them up quite a bit after beating Baylor in Texas. That's a really solid week for Danny Hurley's team. And just nice to be able to do that after such an unconvincing performance in Maui.
Yeah, and Andy, the problem with UConn has been the defense, right? Like that's been the thing we're concerned about. As we get here to the end of the day on Sunday, I think all of Sunday's games are final now.
Yeah.
And UConn is sitting 3rd in offensive efficiency at KenPom, 93rd at defensive efficiency. I mean, that's like the territory that Alabama was living in last year, that Kentucky was living in. And ultimately, Alabama put enough defense together like in the postseason to make it work. Obviously got all the way to the Final Four.
Yeah.
But Dan Hurley is not going to be okay with them staying there defensive. They're going to have to continue to get that figured out. Thankfully, the offense is rolling and you just let that do what it does. But Andy, what I think this leads to for me is the question of, okay, they had that 3-game losing streak. They've got these 2 big wins now, one at home, one on the road. Face Gonzaga this coming Saturday at Madison Square Garden. Do you think UConn has figured stuff out and you're okay with where they're at, or are you kind of withholding judgment until you see them against Gonzaga on Saturday?
Yeah, it's a big game for them. Obviously, it's certainly a big game for Gonzaga as well, looking to bounce back from the loss to Kentucky. Gonzaga doesn't have 3 losses in December very often, and they already have 2 this year. So it'll be interesting to see, how they bounce back. But for UConn, yeah, I think they're figuring it out. I don't think Danny's ever going to be satisfied. That's kind of the nature of the beast with him. And I think they're still working on some stuff. But I think Karaban being back, I think they're finding their rotations a little bit better. I don't think it's a coincidence that they held Texas to 65 points in a game that Aiden Mahaney played 6 minutes. Like, I think that is a pretty clear indication of, hey, if we want to be a better defensive team, he may not be a player who plays big minutes going forward. And I think the front court, you lose Donovan Clingan, who is such an incredibly impactful defensive player. And that's not to take away from Samson Johnson, but it's still an area they're trying to figure out what is the best concoction, because again, both Johnson and Reed played less than 18 minutes in this game, which means they played lineups where neither of those guys were on the floor at times, and they felt they could get away with that against Texas. I don't know. I'd have to look back to see if it was when Shedrick was on the bench. I'm guessing probably, but it's interesting to see them kind of.
Shedrick was only on the bench for 2 minutes in this game,
oh,
so
maybe
that
it'll be interesting to see how they're kind of mixing and matching everything. But I think that they're still a work in progress. And even after the Gonzaga game, if they go out and beat Gonzaga, I think certainly we're going to start feeling like, okay, UConn's back, but it doesn't mean that they're even at their peak. I think that their peak is still coming. And I think that Danny's going to continue to fine tune and kind of tinker and figure out what works best. And I make that, the comment about Mahaney, like, that doesn't mean that he's going to be buried on the bench the rest of the year necessarily. I don't think that that's going to be the case, but there is a situation of like, hey, if you don't figure out ways to improve defensively, you're going to be limited, because he's been an issue for them on that end of the floor. And Danny's just not going to put up with that.
Yeah. Andy, Texas is in a bit of a weird spot. They're 7-2 right now. The 2 losses are to Ohio State on opening day, and then this UConn game. Their best wins are Syracuse, St. Joe's, and NC State. They kind of go under the radar. They've got 4 more non-con games, 3 of which are outside the top 250, plus New Mexico State, before they get into SEC play. So to be honest with you, I do not think that we know what this Texas team is until SEC play starts. And it's just like, again, there's all the question marks we had preseason about depth and other thing. And I still don't think we truly have an answer to that yet.
No, I don't either. I'll tell you this, though. They haven't inspired enough confidence in me to believe that they're a top 10 team in the SEC. I was going to be a little bolder and say top 12, but that top 10-ish. I mean, it feels like they're maybe at the back end of the top 10, but I don't feel that confident in them. I mean, in this game, again, obviously, a loss to Ohio State on the first day of the season doesn't really raise any alarm bells. Opening day losses to power conference teams, that's fine. And UConn, even at home, it's not a great loss, but it's UConn. I think that's okay too. But their bench had 8 fouls and 7 points. Their bench had 1 field goal made and 5 turnovers. Like, their bench is actively bad. It is really hurting them. And I like Kendall Weaver. I've said a lot of positive things about him in the past, and I believe them, but he's not a much of a scorer. And when he has bad games, I mean, they're not getting anything from anybody else on that bench. Jordan Pope had 3 points in the starting lineup. Like, if you got 4 players who are contributing for your team, and one of them is a true freshman and Trey Johnson, who, don't get me wrong, he's phenomenal. I mean, Trey Johnson and Arthur Kaluma combined for 44 of their 65 points. Like, they just do not have enough help. And to me, that looks like a team that's going to finish. I wouldn't be surprised if they finish 3-4 games under 500 in the SEC. That's less of an insult to Texas, more so like that league is just so strong and so deep, and I just don't think they have the horses to hang.
That's the exact point I was going to make when you finished, Andy, is yes, that is about Texas, but it's more about the depth and strength of the SEC, which I think we thought was going to be strong preseason, but it's even stronger than we expected, man. This conference is insane, and part of that is what we started the show with, talking about Mizzou knocking off Kansas and Kentucky, getting that massive comeback against Gonzaga. Things are rolling. Now, Andy, let's turn from the SEC to the Big Ten then. Purdue escapes with a home win over Maryland. We still believe in the Terps, though, while UCLA dethroned Oregon because apparently the bank is open on Sunday. Big Ten actions are going to dominate our six-pack. We're going to get to those games and more coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about FanDuel, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook because right now new customers can bet $5, and if you win, you get $150 in bonus bets. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So you get a hunch in the middle of the game. You can check out the latest stats. You can view live play-by-play and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Yeah, Monday doesn't have a great slate of college basketball games, but Minnesota at Indiana could be interesting. Dawson Garcia maybe gets cooking. Indiana's not been great. We'll see what happens. FanDuel favors Indiana, though, by 10.5. So maybe you could at least take Minnesota to stay within that line or anything else on the site. Go check it out at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. It's time for the Monday six-pack, where Andy and I just kind of work our way quickly through 6 other things we want you to know, either big games or big clumps of games or things like that. Andy, I'll start us very quickly on a couple Sunday's biggest Big Ten games, and then I know we'll get to some others. But Maryland goes to Purdue. Purdue's able to not squeak it out in the end. It was actually a nice, comfortable win. But again, I think, Andy, what I want to take away from it is Maryland. Despite the loss, I leave very impressed by them. Their only losses right now are to Marquette and Purdue. Derek Queen was insane in this game. 26 points, 12 boards, 11 of 8 shooting, hit a couple threes. Now you got to respect that outside shot. Boy, he's by you. This dude's footwork, Andy, is beautiful and brilliant, and I wish we could have seen him against Zach Edey. Great day for Braden Smith. 24 points, 10 assists, 4 rebounds, 2 steals. It's so good. Neither bench contributed really anything to this. Purdue's in great shape. In the nightcap of some Big Ten action, Oregon takes their first loss of the season thanks to a bank shot near the end of this game, 73-71. UCLA moves to 8-1. Their only loss is to New Mexico. They're 2-0 in Big Ten play. Eric Daly, 19-5 on 7 of 8 shooting. Nate Biddle, 22-10, had a nice put back lane to get Oregon kind of back in it. Better days are ahead for Oregon, but man, big time for UCLA to go get this road win in the Big Ten.
A couple other Big Ten results that we had over the weekend. On Friday, Illinois goes down on the road to Northwestern. Wildcats win that one 70-66, 19th ranked team. in the country, in Illinois, taking that loss there. Nice one for Northwestern, who had some tough losses earlier in the year to Butler and Iowa. On Saturday, handful of results. Ohio State takes down Rutgers 80-66. Good bounce back for the Buckeyes. Michigan State, Tom Izzo's team, picks up a massive win at home over Nebraska, 89-52. Not even close in that one. Meanwhile, their counterpart, Michigan, narrowly escapes at home over Iowa, 85-83. We had a combined 33 points on 12 of 17 shooting and 25 rebounds for the two bigs for Michigan, Danny Wolf and Vlad Golden there for Dusty May's club. And then USC bouncing back from some pretty hideous performances the last couple of weeks, that 36-point game against St. Mary's. They got beat pretty bad by Oregon, I believe, as well. They go on the road at Washington, pick up a W there. I think that win might say a little bit more about Washington than it does about USC. But regardless, we now have three Big Ten teams that are 2-0. That is UCLA and then the two Michigan schools, Michigan and Michigan State. We'll see how that holds going forward in conference play.
Andy, we wrapped up Big 12, Big East battle over the weekend. Obviously, the pinnacle of this event came on Wednesday of last week. But how funny that on Sunday, settling the score, the rubber match came down to Oklahoma State and Seton Hall, which the Pokes won 85-76. They were up by 19 at the break, 45-26. Seton Hall somehow scores 50 points in the second half, but it's 2 over, 31 combined turnovers in this game. Ugly, but Oklahoma State wins it for the Big 12. The other three that happened this weekend, West Virginia knocked off Georgetown 73-60 on Friday. 26 points for Javon Small. This dude is cooking, Andy, 19.9 a game. On Saturday, we had Kansas State and St. John's. The Johnnies come back to win this thing 88-71. Loved Rick Pitino honoring Luke Carnesecca with the nice Carnesecca sweater. I think I saw that he went and took it off and laid it down in half court after the game. Just very moving moment. Andy, we still try to reckon with this K-State front court. Ugana Onyenso and Achor Achor combined off the bench for 14 minutes and just 2 points. That ain't going to do it. And then Houston beat Butler 79-51.
Yeah, not much to say on the Houston Butler game. I'm with you on that one. We want to move on to the slate of ACC games. We had 8 of the 9 games were on Saturday. One of them was on Sunday. We'll start with the game on Sunday since it was the more interesting result. That would be Duke taking down Louisville. I guess it's not an interesting result, just more of an interesting game. It was pretty close throughout. Duke ended up pulling away. Louisville struggling at home. Unfortunately, they've played some really tough games at home and haven't been able to win. At least they stayed competitive in this one. They've been kind of ran off their home floor a few times this year. Duke was down 4 at halftime and managed to come back, outscored the Cards by 15 in the second half. Cooper Flagg, 20 points, 12 boards, 2 steals, a block, and an assist. 8 of 17 from the field. He was 1 of 3 from 3, made all 3 of his free throws. Terrence Edwards had 21 off the bench for the Cardinals, but Noah Waterman kind of replaced Cason Pryor in the starting lineup, and he had 1 point and 4 turnovers, and I think it just really highlights how rough it is going to be for Louisville losing one of their key front court players in Cason Pryor. Hopefully Pat Kelsey can find ways around it. Noah Waterman's going to have better days, but that was a tough thing to see for Louisville. We'll rapid fire the other results here. A couple that seemed like they might merit more conversation, but the favored teams ultimately ended up winning. Pitt was down 8 at the half to Virginia Tech, who we talked about being, according to KenPom, the worst, and Net, I believe, they were the worst Power 5 team in the country. Pitt ended up winning that one on the road by 5 after being down 8 at half. North Carolina at home against Georgia Tech was in a dogfight all game long. It was not pretty. It was, in fact, the opposite. It was pretty hideous, but the Tar Heels get a win. It still goes in the win column regardless of the score. So good on North Carolina for finding a way to get that one, but that front court still needs some work for Hubert Davis's club. Notre Dame beats Syracuse at home 69-64. Clemson does not suffer a kind of a lapse after beating Kentucky. They go on the road to Miami and win by 10. Wake Forest holds off Boston College 72-66. SMU picks up their first conference win ever, hosting Virginia 63-51. NC State beats Florida State in overtime 84-74. And then another first-time victory in the ACC. Stanford goes on the road to take on Cal, wins 89-81 to pick up their first win in conference play.
Andy, how about some dubs for the West Coast Conference? Well, one of which is really a Pac-12 school, but whatever. Wazoo.
Pac-12 matchup, too.
Yes, exactly. Wazoo does not go the way of Washington. They knock off Boise State 74-69. Really nice to get that. They've beaten out both Nevada and Boise State without said Coward, so that's a big deal. Are the Cougs legit challenger in the WCC? We're going to keep our eyes on that. St. Mary's keeps on getting dubs. They go win at Utah 72-63. They're up 17 at the break and just hold on as they go on. St. Mary's 9-1, Andy Patton.
Yeah, having a good season. Speaking of Mountain West teams losing, as we talked about with Boise State, we had a couple other results not go in the favor of the Mountain West Conference. UNLV went to Creighton, took a loss there, a comfortable 18-point win for the Blue Jays. I was pretty close for a while. I think it was 24-21, toward the late part of the first half, and then Creighton just went on a huge run. It continued into the second half, and at that point, this thing was not anywhere close. Pop Isaacs, unfortunately, done for the season for Creighton. That is a really tough loss. There's some, I believe it was a hip or a back injury with him, and they're just concerned that it could lead to some serious long-term effects. So they want to get him surgery. They want to get him healthy now. So he is out the door. Nice to see Creighton, similarly to Clemson, not suffer a kind of fall after beating a really good team in Kansas earlier in the week. And then we had Colorado State at Colorado. The Buffs pick up a comfortable win over their in-state rival, the Rams, 72-55. Colorado was up 21 or 22 at halftime and just really coasted from there. I wanted to shout out Ethan Morton, former Purdue player, had a hilarious line for Colorado State. He had 0 points on 0 of 1 shooting, 3 boards, 2 assists, a steal, and a block, and 5 fouls in 28 minutes. So he played 28 minutes, only took 1 shot, committed 5 fouls. If you remember Ethan Morton from his time at Purdue, he was often used to come in the final few minutes of half to basically prevent anybody else from picking up any fouls. So it's kind of funny that he is playing a bigger role for Colorado State, but still seems to be doing some of the same things. And I'll give a very, very quick note. Rhode Island takes down Providence. We mentioned Providence took a loss earlier. Rhode Island's 9-0, fighting Lamar Odom's 9-0 on the season. Nice win for Rhode Island over Providence, especially with Bryce Hopkins back in the mix for the Friars. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for us today. Thank you so much to those of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Like we said earlier, there's not a ton of great games this week, but we're going to get you previews and recaps for the games that are relevant this week. We do got some fun ones still coming up. I know Iowa State are taking each other on this week. We got some other ranked games going on as well, and then we'll get you ready for a big-time weekend of college hoops. I know we got Alabama Creighton, we got Gonzaga UConn, we got some other really fun games coming your way this weekend. Thanks again, folks, for listening. We want to say apologies to the Lawyer family, although Purdue got themselves a nice W. Let's go Wildcats. What up, Northwestern and Kentucky? I guess we'll give them some credit too. And until Tuesday, peace out.